My name is Heather Kutzman. I'm the product manager for CounterSketch, and this is our August solution session with CounterSketch. On today's webinar, we're going to cover 3 topics. The first is Pinterest to price. So in this, we're going to take images that I've found on either Pinterest or Instagram and work through creating those in CounterSketch from a picture. The other thing we're going to discuss are some freehand scrolls. So there are tons of freehand scrolls in the library, and it was difficult to kind of pick the favorite or the most useful, but I picked 3 just to kind of call out and share with you guys today to kind of bring to your attention so that the next time you're designing, you might consider these new and different parts. And finally, we're going to discuss grouping objects in freehand. So this is a great feature. It gives you the ability to kind of design quickly, again, moving things around in a group rather than independently. So this is another piece that we'll talk about a little bit on today's webinar. As we mentioned, we're going to start out with Pinterest to price, and the very first style that we're going to do is kind of this unique cluster. So we've got a princess cut in the center, or I guess it's kind of a step cut princess in the center, surrounded by straight baguettes on all 4 sides. And then you'll notice, in addition to this kind of cluster of step cut stones, they are framed in kind of this gold border around the outside. And it's also part of a stackable band set. So we're going to make sure that when we create this cluster, we've got plenty of clearance underneath for these stackable bands to go on either side. You'll notice that the base band that our cluster sits on is kind of fairly wide, and it has kind of a squared off profile. So that's where we're going to start when we begin to build this ring. So let's start out by jumping into CounterSketch. And once we're in CounterSketch, we're going to choose a freehand part. And as I mentioned, we're going to choose a shank and just a classic band. So we'll start out here with this classic band and add it onto our screen. Once we've got this band out on our screen, we're going to set the size. 7 will work. And we're also going to change the shank profile to be square. In addition to that, you'll notice that this band actually has some hollowing underneath. We don't need that for our design, so we're going to take the hollowing away. And we want to increase the width. So we want to make it a little bit wider, a little more substantial. So we're going to maybe go to about a 4 millimeter at the top and maybe the same at the bottom. So shank bottom profile width will go up to 4 as well. And that should get us started on our design. So now that we have this design pulled up on our screen, we're going to add the stones. So we're going to come down to freehand parts, left click on the plus sign. All right. So now that we have this pulled up, we're going to select our center setting. So come in here. And that center stone is bezel set. So I'm just going to select a bezel set option and add it onto our screen. So this is going to be that first piece in the center. You'll also remember that it was princess, not round. So we're going to change the shape to princess. And then we're just going to drag this straight up so that it's on our band. Now we've got a couple options here. If we want, we can change this so that it's more rounded and kind of contours to our band, which I think is helpful. And then we also need to start thinking about scale and size. So right now the center stone is a 1 carat. I'm worried that our cluster is going to be significantly large if we leave this as a 1 carat. So I'm just going to make it a good bit smaller, so that once we get the rest of these diamonds around it, it's still a decent sized cluster, but not too large. And we can always go back to our photo and try to get an idea. So I'm guessing that it's approximately maybe a little bit smaller than the width of the band based on this photo. But again, all of these things can be updated and adjusted based on your customer's budget and the overall size that they're looking for. So that should get us started. We may have to make some adjustments to the height of this center stone over time, but that's at least somewhere to start. The next thing we need to do is add our gems. So we're going to go into settings and add out those straight baguettes. So we have these, which is perfect because we need something that kind of has that bar set option. We're going to make some adjustments to this setting. Right off we can see that it's kind of contoured, and we need something that's going to be more flat on the bottom most likely because we're going to be placing it in different locations. So let's drag this forward, and this is a good time to reference our photo again. So we can see that this one kind of starts here on the left corner and goes past almost double the width or double the length of that center gem. So again, we'll go back into our picture. We've got it starting on the left corner, but we need to make it a lot longer. So we're going to drag it to the right. And once I do that, you can see maybe this size is a little bit too large. So we're going to play with this until we feel like we get the size approximately correct. Now with these taper baguettes, we've got a couple of different settings and it can be difficult to find the right size. So again, you just want to kind of work with this until you get the look that your customer likes. So you'll notice even though I'm going to the right, the size is changing pretty significantly, and that's because it's basing it on the height. So the height goes through a couple of different width adjustments, and that results in different sizes. So we literally jump from 8, 10, 16, 23 point stones, and then we go back to 8. So just keep that in mind when you're designing. So this one's a lot wider. It's like almost a square. And that looks a little bit better, but I still think we could go larger. So let's try this one. That doesn't look bad either, so let's go ahead and get another stone on the opposite side. And you can see how this is working. We're starting to get that balance that we're looking for. I'm going to go to a top-down view just so I can make sure that my placement is correct. From here, I need to get the other stone that's going to go lengthwise in this direction, and that is going to impact the size of my stones significantly. So I kind of want to lay those out so I can start to see how all of this is going to work together. To do that, I'm just going to duplicate this stone. And once I have it duplicated, I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees, and then we're just going to place it here at the end of this other piece. So sizing wise, this is looking pretty good. And again, we're only looking at this through a top-down view, so we may need to make some adjustments, but this is a pretty good start. I will also mention that over here we have the ability to turn off one end of these sizing bars independently. Now, in my opinion, we're going to leave that one that's connecting in on the interior and maybe turn off the exterior option because we're going to have that bar of gold that's going to kind of wrap around the outside of this. If you can't get your proportions exactly the way that you want them, consider decreasing the size of this center stone. So right now it's 13 points. If I take this down to 10, then that may allow me to kind of get everything just a little bit closer in and get perhaps a better fit. So that's kind of more like what I was thinking. The other thing I'm going to do is on this first stone, again, I'm going to remove that outside setting because I know I'm going to have that wall of gold kind of wrapping around the outside of my entire piece. So from a top-down view, this is really starting to come together, but let's now change to a perspective view to kind of see how everything is looking. And overall, I'm pretty pleased with this. This is looking nice. We've got some good structure, height-wise, my center stone is a little low. So if I want, I can select these baguette stones and lower their height, or I can bring that center stone up. So again, this is going to be kind of at you and your customer's discretion to decide. Alternatively, if I don't want to lower things, I can always go in and make adjustments to these settings to make them a little bit different and kind of fit better with my overall design. I think what I'm going to do is just lower these settings. So to kind of jump ahead a little bit in our lesson, we're going to create a group. So this is a kind of in action example. So we're going to left click on this first group of settings. Then we're going to hold down the Control key on our keyboard and left click on the other group of settings. So now you can see that both of them are selected. If I want to create a permanent group, I'm going to left click here and choose this first option that says Create Group. Now these 4 stones are joined together visually in the thumbnail down here, and when I adjust the height, they're all going to move together, which is exactly what we want them to do. And again, this may take some back and forth, so I want to be sure that I don't mess with my clearance underneath my ring. So I am going to have, remember, that matching band that's going to go on either side of this. So instead of that, what I may do, I'm going to break my group. I just left click on that little link in the top. And I'm going to go through and actually adjust the height of these. So come in to our gem height, and we're just going to lower this height a good bit so that this setting becomes a little bit more compact and doesn't interfere with those bands that are soon to join us. So same thing on this option. We're going to lower the height a good bit. And I think that gets us more in line with what we're looking for. So we've got our cluster started, but we need that band of gold that's going to kind of wrap around the outside and hold all of this together. Now there's 2 ways that we could do this. I played with both when I was building this ring the first time, and I actually like the setting option the best. So again, you can do this a lot of different ways. I'm going to show you one way that I preferred, but doesn't mean it's the only way that you could build it. So what I'm going to do is go into that bezel stone that we had before, add it out onto our screen. And this bezel actually can be modified to remove the center setting. So we can take that gem center out. So left click here, and it takes that gem out, and we just have the bezel remaining. So I'm also going to change the shape of this to be a princess. So now you can kind of see where I'm going with this. I'm just going to use this setting as that outside wall. Now the advantage of that is that we have this kind of lip that would hold our center stone typically, that will kind of be the outside to catch all of these gems. So that's kind of why I thought this might be a good option. There's a lot more adjustments that we can make as well, so we're going to need to go in and make this the right size. I went way too large, which is okay. We'll just kind of get it in the right position alignment wise, so we can go to the through finger, kind of get this so that it's hitting right where those gems are, and then we can decrease the height, then we can decrease the size. So maybe, how's that look? I'm doing a lot of flipping back and forth in my perspective and through finger view as I work to get the size right. That looks pretty close. Maybe a little bit, let's see. Actually, I'm pretty happy with that. There's a little bit of a gap here on these, so I'm just going to move them out a little bit. How do these look? That looks pretty good. So that gets us really close. I'm going to make some more changes, which may require that we bend some other things. So for example, I think it would be good to change perhaps the bend amount on this setting. Again, this is super deep, right? It's cutting into our piece, and we don't want to because we have those rails that we've got to think about. So we're going to go back in here and choose bezel bottom bend, and that's going to contour that bezel so that it goes. But it's contouring to our ring rail, and we actually really want it to contour to the top of our shank. So what we're going to have to do is adjust our gem height and make it a lot lower. You notice that as we do this, it changes our placement on our bezel so we can bring it up. So again, a lot of adjusting that we're going to have to do when we're doing this. We might also want to change our metal color so that we can see this a little bit better as we're working on it. So again, we're getting closer. We've got that nice wall around the outside, but unfortunately we need to decrease the height so that we have space for those matching bands to live underneath. So again, we've lowered our gem height as far as we can, and we're just going to expand our control range so that we can continue to adjust that height. And it gets just a little shorter every time, and we may need to, again, move this to adjust the placement. And that looks pretty close. So again, one of the reasons I chose to use this bezel instead of just another piece of metal or another square that we might have in the collection is because it gives us some kind of fun options to play with as far as the shape of this bezel wall. So we've got it there, and I think that this is pretty, close to what we were trying to build. But if you notice here under bezel, we've got a bezel profile chooser. So if you look at this from the side, we can actually make adjustments. So we can make this bezel kind of taper out a little bit at the top to give it more of a frame around that center. We can also choose to kind of, again, give it a different looking frame that kind of bows out a little more. But you've got lots of profile options to choose from. We can even add a little texture to the side of this bezel to give it something a little bit more unique. Can even bend in on the sides. So all of these profile choosers, I think, give you an opportunity to add kind of an added design element or some depth to the piece that maybe it didn't have in its original form. I really liked some of these first ones back here at the very start that give us a little bit more of a frame around that center cluster that we've built. So I think that that's the one that I'm going to choose. All right, I'm not crazy about how this particular piece is cutting down, so I may want to, oops, nope, not that one, undo. I may want to adjust the angle of this just a little bit, so maybe turn it up some, or I can again go back in and adjust my height on this setting. So gem height, expand control range, and we're just gonna bring the height down. And that again just starts to tuck that little piece back up under there, and then we'll bring this back up in line with everything else. So now we've got lots of clearance on either side of this band, and we can add out those matching bands fairly quickly. So go back to our add freehand parts, look under shanks, and we're just going to look for, I think it's an eternity band because I think that these guys could easily spin around on your finger pretty quickly. So we're just looking for kind of a bead set eternity band to go with this piece. Let's see, is this one eternity? Nope. No, we have one. I found it yesterday. How does this look? This has got some detail that's going to make this one a lot thicker, so I'm not crazy about that as an option, but we could use it if we wanted to. We'll just have to make maybe some adjustments for allowances as far as clearance on the side of the ring. let's see, this guy. So we'll add this one out into our design. And then we're going to make those stones a good bit wider. So if we remember from our picture, we've got this cluster in the center, and then we're going to add these matching bands on either side. And they're fairly wide. They've got some decent sized gemstones in them. So we've got that one out on our screen. We want to make sure that our finger size is the same. So I'm going to go back and check my original shank. It's a size 7. And then I want to make sure that I keep these new bands a size 7 as well. So we said that we wanted them to be wider. So I'm going to choose my shank top profile width and maybe bring it to like a 5 or a 3.5. And we're going to do the same thing down here at the bottom. And then we're going to increase the size of these gems to maybe a 2.5 or a 3. And when we made all of those adjustments, we just needed to give these guys a little bit more space. And you can see here that because we designed with this in mind, we've got plenty of clearance for that band to go underneath. We do need one on the other side, so we're just going to do a top mirror and bring that over. And again, this is where we can go in and maybe make some adjustments as far as metal color. I think everything was yellow in our original piece. And then we can use our any gem, any color options to go in and select the colors of all of these gems. So I think we had a sapphire and ruby band. I'm just going to do one of them to save us a little time. But we can go in and make these whatever color we want. Just left clicking on these stones to select them. And then we're going to choose sapphire and apply. And now we can see how this set would look together. And we are going to move on to our next one. So this next option is really pretty it's pretty complex. I'm not going to lie to you guys. It's not one of the easier models that we've done. It's going to take us a couple of minutes to pull it all together, but I think it's a beautiful style, and I think it's very relevant for what we're seeing customers look for right now. So this next one is basically a modified halo is the way I think about it. So we've got a really custom size and shape halo. So we've got some round stones. Obviously this stone and these stones are larger, and then we've got very small and kind of medium sized stones in between, kind of bridging that gap to make up this really unique shaped halo. We've also got these trillions on either side, and I'm calling this a trillion and emerald 3 stone because these trillions are significant enough, I think we could call this, but typically when you see trillions in a 3 stone, they're facing the other direction, right? So the long flat side is facing our center stone. So this is really an unusual configuration. The next thing that you'll notice on the shank down here, and we don't get a really great picture of it, but it looks like we've got 2 round stones after the trillion, and then we've got another single round and then maybe a smaller round. So again, we've got a lot of different sizes in this piece, and so we're going to work through how we would almost have to custom build this halo from parts and pieces, and that's why I say it's going to take us a little bit longer than usual to build this one out, but I think it's a worthy example again because we're seeing so many bridal styles, especially right now, that are doing a modification on a halo. So it's not your traditional everything matches perfect round stone halo. It's kind of a variation with that same idea of using the diamonds around the center stone to kind of accentuate the size. So I'll stop talking about it and we will start building it. So let's head back into CounterSketch. Again, there's nothing exactly like this in the library that I can choose from. So I'm just going to build from our freehand. I'm going to add a ring rail guide by left clicking on this in the upper left corner. This is going to help me to keep my size and kind of maintain everything in the right proportion. I'm going to choose a size 6.5 for this option. And then we're going to go in and add a shank because we really need a base that we can build all of this on top of. So let's come down here and select this shank as the starting point. Now you'll notice that this shank does have accent stones on the band. They're not configured in the way that we're looking for, so I'm going to turn them off and we'll just have the shank to work from. Now you'll notice here that my ring rail guide and my shank are not matching up, and that's a reminder to me that I need to adjust the size of that shank down to a 6.5 so that everything is going to fit nicely. The next thing I need to do is add my center stone. So I'm going to come in here, look at my settings, and it's kind of a half bezel option. It's not completely half, but there is an opening on the sides. So this is the stone that I'm going to select, or the setting I'm going to select for this option. You'll also notice that it shows here that there is an opening on the side of this bezel. Fortunately, I have the ability in my options over here to remove that gallery cutout, which is what we're going to do because we really won't be able to see it, so it doesn't add to our design in this case. We're just going to bring this setting up until the bottom just touches that ring rail so that everything is connected. Also, you'll notice here that my bezel opening on the side is a lot larger than what it is in my picture. So we want to just make that a little bit smaller. So we're going to go into our setting. The half bezel amount is to the far right. So we're going to expand that slider and just bring it to the right a little bit more. And that closes that up. That may be a little bit too much. We want to just a little bit of an opening there to kind of hint to the fact that it's a half bezel. And I'm going to decrease my bezel wall thickness just a little because it looks a little bit obtrusive. Doesn't have to completely go away. We know when we set it, we can kind of play with that and adjust the thickness, but I think that that'll bring it down so that it's more manageable. Also, we want to consider the height. Maybe bring this height on our center stone down just a little bit. It doesn't have to come down a lot because we do have a halo and a couple of other things that we've got to add, and we want to make sure that that center stone sits up above everything else, but at the same time, we don't want it to sit up too much. So that looks good for now, but we can always come back and make adjustments. To kind of pull our ring together and give us a good base, I'm going to go back to this shank and we're just going to close this span a good bit so that it actually makes contact with our center setting. So we're going to give us just kind of a really basic solitaire to start from, and then we can start building on with other pieces. I also want to kind of make sure that my proportions are correct. So if I again reference my image, this emerald cut shape is pretty narrow. Now you can choose whether or not you want to make yours, exactly this way based on the center stone that your customer chooses, but I may make mine just a little bit narrower to kind of reflect the picture that we're trying to follow. So I just took this from a 7x5 to a 7x4 to kind of emphasize that elongated shape. Alright, so that gets us started. When I made that adjustment, you can see that my shank kind of lost connection, so we're just going to bring that a little bit to the right to connect everything back together. And then we're going to add those trillions. So I'm going to left click on the plus sign, left click on settings, and I just want a prong set trillion, which is this basket will definitely fit the bill. So we've got our prong set basket setting for our trillion that we're going to add out onto our screen. And when it comes out, you're going to see that it actually, when we choose the trillion shape, it's going to go to a V prong. And that's one of the reasons that I love this setting so much, is we have a lot of flexibility. So we throw out our trillion option, And like I said, it defaults to these V prongs. All I have to do to change this is choose under settings, V prongs on corners. It's going to take those away and we go back to a traditional prong. You'll also notice that this is curved, which would be great, but our trillions are going to be facing a different direction, so this curvature isn't really going to make sense for what we're trying to do. So I'm going to go to my lower gallery rail and I'm going to choose lower gallery rail bend and take this all the way to the right to kind of flatten that out so that it's more reflective of the shape that I'm going to be using. Then we're going to use our arrows to bring this trillion up and then over to where we want it to live. I also need to rotate it so that the point is facing in towards my center stone. And as I'm doing all of this, I'm seeing that my trillion definitely needs to be a lot smaller. So right now it's about a 1 carat, so it's definitely fighting with my center stone. So I'm just going to drag this down and make it significantly smaller. And that looks a little bit more proportionate to what we're trying to build. So we're going to bring this down. We can use our rotation handles again to kind of place this so that it follows the curvature of our shank. And we just want to bring it down so that it's making contact with our shank so that everything is kind of nicely supported. This again is going to be up to you, so if you don't want this gallery rail, because our stone got so small, we don't really need that upper gallery rail, so we can come in and left click under our setting options to remove that upper gallery rail to give it a little bit more light from the sides. So that looks pretty good. We're going to do our top mirror to mirror one over, or no, sorry, we're going to do our side mirror, excuse me, to mirror it over to the other side. And we've started to pull in and start to create this halo. Now the next thing we're going to look at are these round stones that are kind of forming the outside or the tops and bottoms of our halo. This stone at the top and bottom, and then on the left and right, these three guys, in my opinion, are the same size. So we've got 1, 2, 3 stones on this side that are the same, and then 3 stones on this side that are the same. And so I'd like to be able to lay all 3 of those out at the same time so that I don't have to place each and every one of these stones individually. So to do that, I'm going to use polar array, but in a little bit of a different way than we have in previous webinars. So I'm going to left click here to add my freehand parts. I'm going to left click under settings, and I'm going to bring out that same 4-prong basket setting, and that's going to be our start for this kind of larger stones within our halo that we're going to build. That stone, like I said, it's the largest, or those 6 are the largest in our halo, but they're still not huge, right? They need to be proportionate to the rest of our pieces. So I'm going to actually take this stone down to its smallest size in the range just to get us started. I'm going to use my arrow keys to bring it up and then out so that we can see it. And I'm going to play with my settings. So again, because the stone is so small, I don't feel like we need that upper gallery rail. So I'm going to left click to remove that upper gallery rail, and I can make it a lot shorter as well. So I'm going to adjust my gem height to bring it down so that it's closer to that rail. I want to be kind of vigilant and make sure that that culet doesn't go through the back of the setting. So I'm just going to give it a little bit of space, but not so much that it gets in the way. Now that we've got our first stone laid out, I'm going to go to a top-down view to get everything laid out from a visual perspective, so how the customer will see it on their hand, and then we can come back later and adjust the height of all of these pieces. So I'm going to start out, as I mentioned, we're going to use polar array, and so I'm going to left click on this blue box, and that takes me to my polar array mode. I'm going to left click on that polar array icon, and we start to see that we've got our handles that are coming out for polar array. As I mentioned, we're going to do this a little bit differently than we traditionally do with polar array, so I'm going to bring it back so that my angle stops right around where that trillion is. And I'm going to choose this second option in my polar array to change. So we're going to left click here from just regular to symmetrical. So instead of everything happening just on one side, now it's happening on the other side as well. So we've got this all tied together. So now that we've got this, we only need 3 total stones on this side. So I'm going to decrease my count, and you can see kind of in this green box out here, I'm going to decrease my count until we just get 3. And that looks pretty good, right? So this is really close. We want to bring in these stones on the sides, but that was a kind of a quick and easy way to lay out stones on one side. Now, if we want to create the other 3 that are going to go on the other side, I'm going to use this top mirror option here in my upper left corner, and that's going to mirror those gems over to the other side. So we've got all 6 of those larger halo stones laid out pretty quickly, at least in comparison to placing them individually. As I mentioned, the only thing that I don't like about what I've done is that these stones are too far out away from my center stone. I want to bring them in to kind of fill this space here on the sides. So to do that, I can change the overall shape of my polar array. So by default, you can see that the shape of my polar array is round. I can left click on this third option in my polar array menu to change it from round to other shapes. So the first option is kind of an cushion, an oblong cushion, and that brings those stones closer into my center, but I've still got a little bit of a gap, so I'm going to keep going. The next option is an oval, and I'm pretty happy with this one. These guys are really close in. I don't have a lot of gap, but it's making a nice shape around the outside, so that's a good option. We'll remember oval. I can also choose emerald cut, which isn't bad. I actually think the oval looks a lot better, but that's an option. We've got an Asher cut that doesn't help us at all. We've got a heart shape, which is actually kind of interesting because it does bring them in, but not in an even fashion. So whereas here, you know, everything looks a little bit too tight maybe with the heart shape. The next is a pear. Again, everything's a little bit too close. Or sorry, that was a marquee and now a pear. Everything looks too close. Square, everything's too far out. And back to our first option, which was a round. So I'm going to choose that second option, or the third option, excuse me, that we looked at, which was an oval, and that kind of brings everything closer in, but I still have space here because we've got to get 2 more stones in these openings. So that looks pretty good. I'm going to kind of leave what we've got there and turn off polar array. So we've got 6 of those halo stones laid out right off the bat. Now you'll remember when we started this, we did a top-down view, so we want to go to a perspective view just to kind of look and make sure everything looks okay. I may raise these just slightly. We don't have to. We can lower them if we want, but I may raise them just a smidge and see. After looking at it, I feel like my center stone is a little too high, so we can always go back to that center stone and adjust the height. So we just go in here, expand our control range, and I just want to bring that center gem down just a smidge so that everything starts to look more cohesive. And we can adjust the placement and bring this down. So that is more in line with what I think I want. And again, this is going to be between you and your customer to discuss. So are they looking for something that's more low profile? Do they really want the stone to stand up and be noticed? All those types of things you guys can decide. In my head, I wanted this a little lower, so I was able to bring it down. So let's get back to work and finishing out building this really unique halo. We've got 2 more stones that we need to add in here on either side, and so we're going to get to work on doing those. Now, I went to a lot of work to build this setting, and I really like the way I've configured it. So rather than bring out another setting and go through the steps of configuring it again, oh, we did have a question of how to turn off polar array. So we're actually going to walk through that, Jody, really quickly. So I will show you as we build out this next piece. So here we go. So we've got our stone setting that we really like. And so rather than build a new one, I'm just going to come in here and duplicate this piece. And I know what you're thinking. You're going, Heather, wait a minute. This is duplicating 6 with polar array turned on, and we only really need 2 or 4. That's true, but again, I really like this setting, so I don't want to have to go through the process of building it again. So rather than rebuild the setting, I'm going to duplicate the setting that I like, but I'm going to turn off polar array. So right now polar array is turned on and there's 6 of these. I don't need 6. So I'm going to left click on this blue box, and you can see that my polar array handles come out right away. And then if I left click on this very top option, it takes me through the different angles of polar array. And as I do that, I'm going to come to the last option, or the first option, which turns polar array off. So again, I'm just going to left click on that icon. It starts taking me through the various directions of polar array. And the last option is to just completely turn those handles off, which is what we want to do. To get out of polar array mode, I'm going to left click on this blue box until I get back to my actual handles, which is where I want it to be. Now this is our smallest of our halo stones in our cluster. So what I'm going to do is make this size very small. So we're going to go to 1.3 millimeters to kind of emphasize the difference in size. When I made it smaller, the height doesn't really correspond, so we need to go in and adjust our gem height as well. There we go. And then we can start to place this setting. Also, because our stone now is so small, I think our prongs look a little overbearing, maybe just a little. So we can also go into our setting options and adjust the prong height and width. These are galleries. We are in prongs. Prong profile width, I'll just make them a little bit smaller, and prong profile height. So that makes those a little bit more proportionate to our setting. And we're just moving this around and bringing this in so that it sits nicely next to that larger stone. Now you'll remember that we just duplicated our first setting, and when we did that we inherited this top mirror. In this case, what I'm really looking for is going to be a quad mirror. So I'm going to, instead of choosing top mirror, I'm going to left click on quad, and that's going to give me 4 of these gems. Last one is to fill in this last remaining space. So again, I'm super happy with that setting. I like the way it looks. So I'm just going to choose to duplicate that setting to bring it over and fill in this last space in our halo. So we're duplicating that. Once it duplicates, we can use our arrows to position it in that remaining space between these guys just to finish off our halo. And again, I'm just using my arrow keys and my rotation to kind of bring this in and place it in that space. Now, if we want, we can make it larger, because of the sizing that I've chosen, you can see it's not like it's just fitting with that 1.3 that I've got in there. I'm afraid if I make this a 1.5, it's going to be too big or too small. So if we are insistent upon having that larger size, we can always go back to our polar array gems and make these guys smaller. So we can go 1.7 by 1.7. That should give us a little more space, right? And then we can go back to our 1.3s. We can move those over closer to our first stone. And then that'll give us the ability to come into this last stone and update it to a 1.5. So now we've got that true kind of taper that we were looking for. So we've got our 1.7s on the corners, 1.3 and 1.5. Let's go and look at this from a top-down view. I think my gap here between the trillion and this first round is a little too much. So I'm going to go back to the center stone because that's what drives these other stones using our polar array. And I'm going to turn that polar array option back on and make some adjustments. So I'm just going to change this angle to bring it closer to my trillion. And then again, we've got some more adjusting to do, right? So we've got to go back in here and just fill in that gap with these other stones. So again, when you're building these custom clusters, lots of adjustments that need to be made, but you can definitely do it, and using polar array is going to make it go a little bit more quickly than you typically would. So we've got our custom built halo, and right now it's kind of floating out there on its own. So if we look at this from the bottom, it looks pretty good, like they are making contact decently, but not something that you'd want to wear every day and kind of get abused or beat up on. So what we need to do is give it a base that all of this is going to sit on top of. And so now I'm going to go back into my freehand parts menu and just add out a piece of wire rope that we're going to place underneath this piece to give it a little bit of support in all of those settings that we've pulled together. We're going to quickly run through placing this. We're going to bring it up underneath here, and then we're just going to adjust the inside width until we can't see it anymore, because nobody wants to see support, right? When you're building a house, you don't want to see the studs and the sheetrock that are behind all of your walls. You just want them to stay standing. And the same is true for jewelry. We just want to bring this in until we can't see it, but it's going to live there to give our piece some added support. So let's decrease the length just a little bit more. And it's also kind of thick, right? It doesn't need to be this heavy. And I want it to make really good contact with these settings. So I'm going to decrease the height of that profile to make it a little bit skinnier, not quite so big, and make sure that it's making contact up underneath. So that gives us our nice halo that's supported with all of those pieces. So we talked about grouping just a bit earlier. Let's say that I wanted to group all of these halo pieces into one. Again, to do that, I'm going to left click on the first piece that I want to choose. So in this case, it's going to be my trillion stones. And then I'm going to hold down the Control key on my keyboard, and I'm going to click on the other components in this halo. So I'm holding down Control, and I'm just left clicking on the other parts of the halo. As I hover over these, they're kind of highlighting in red on my screen so that I can be sure that I'm grabbing everything that I want and not the pieces that I don't want. So you'll notice these are in the shank. I don't want these stones. but I do want my support piece. So we have a total of, what are we looking at? 5 pieces that make up our halo. We've left clicked while holding control to select all of these components. And now we're going to go back to our first piece that we selected, and we know it's the first piece because the box around it is larger. And we're going to left click on the menu and left click on that first option to create a group. So now it's going to take all 5 of these pieces, our base, our trillions, and those 3 different size rounds, and it's going to combine them together to create this one piece, which is now our halo. This is perfect. That's exactly what we wanted it to do. So now that they are all grouped together, when we come in and move one, everything else is going to move together. So see, we've got everybody moving at the same time. Unfortunately, because these are on all different angles, they did not move together. So we'd have to do some moving individually with these pieces, but that's how we would go in and create a group of parts. Let's do that same example with our stones on the side. So we can come in here, left click on this first stone on our shank, hold down shift and left click on that grouping of 2 stones. Sorry, not hold down shift, hold down control and left click on that other group so they're both highlighted. Then left click here to group. And then as these guys are grouped, we're going to, that's right, put them together. And now we can come in and move these stones as we see fit. So those groups are really helpful when we're moving things around. Then we can come in here if we don't want these things grouped together, and we're just going to left click on this icon in the upper left corner to ungroup. So that takes it away. So again, just to review, to create a group, you select the items, holding down control so that you can select more than one item at a time, and then you're going to choose that first option, which is create group. Once you have the group created, if you need to break the group apart to make some adjustments to the pieces that are in the group, you can left click on this little broken link or broken chain option, and that will ungroup your part and separate them back out into their original components. As we mentioned, we're going to talk just a little bit briefly about scrolls this morning. These are 3 great scrolls. 2 of them are counterparts, which means that they have libraries that you can adjust. This first one is just a very traditional scroll, but because of the fact that it's a counterpart, we can adjust the look, the size, the scale, the curvature, even the profile shape of this piece. And so I would really recommend, if you're looking at using a scroll that you need to kind of modify, this is a great one to use. The second scroll is a static part, so you can't make a lot of adjustments to it, but I think it fits nicely in a lot of designs and has a great shape and overall feel to it. So this is another great one to use. This third one is in the scroll category. There may be some debate over if it's truly a scroll or not, but I think it's a beautiful piece and it's extremely versatile. So if you haven't checked out CPSC 018, definitely do so. You can actually cut it in half and only use half of it if you want. You can change the profile of these kind of fan pieces that are coming out. You can change the I guess joint piece or end piece down here at the bottom to look differently. It's very, very versatile, so definitely check this one out if you have not done so already. Quick reminder, we are on Facebook, we're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube, all under the GemVision Corp option, so please join us there. Our education team has done some amazing things, especially on our Instagram recently. If you don't follow us on Instagram, you will be happy that you do, because we're like I said, our education team is putting together a feature called Freehand Friday, where there's a quick video showing a freehand trick that I think all of you guys would really enjoy. So again, if you haven't joined us on our social media platforms yet, please do. There's some great content there that I think will benefit you. We also recorded today's webinar. So again, if there are members of your team that were unable to join that would like to join, they can definitely watch the recording. All they need to do is go to stellar.com/webinars and left click on Watch Now for the August solution session with CounterSketch option. And that should be up Monday or Tuesday of next week. Also, a quick reminder, as I mentioned, our education team is doing lots of great new features, and one of those is on our CounterSketch online training. So if you aren't already or if you haven't purchased access to CounterSketch online training, I would encourage you to do so. There's a monthly feature called Freehand Face-Off where our members of our team, actually this month, I got to participate in Freehand Face-Off. I won't tell you which piece is mine because I don't want to sway your voting, but what you can do is go in, see these two pieces built, and also vote on your favorite. In addition to being able to watch the video of how these are built, you can actually download the CSG file and open it in your CounterSketch and kind of play around with it if you like. And again, this is a feature on our CounterSketch online training. So if you have questions about that or how to get access to that, please let me know. So we do have another webinar coming up in September. That's our September CounterSketch solution session, which is going to be on Thursday, September 12th at 9 a.m. As we did today, we'll go over some Pinterest to price examples. We'll also talk about importing parts into Freehand. So if you own Matrix Gold or another advanced CAD software, or you have a friend who does, you can build parts in those environments and import them into Freehand. We're going to talk about how you go about doing that. We're going to showcase some Freehand wire parts also in our next webinar, so you can look forward to that coming up in September. To register for that webinar, just go to sign up at stellar.com/webinars, so the same place where you can watch the video of today's webinar. Thank you so much for your time this morning. I really do appreciate you choosing to join the webinar, and I hope that it was helpful for you. If you have any questions along the way, again, please feel free to reach out to us at countersketch@gemvision.com, and we'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining me. Have a great rest of your Thursday.